Ixari adjusted the weight of the pack on her shoulders and stepped onto the platform's edge, her boots echoing softly against the metal floor. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the transparent hull, glittering like distant fires against the black void. 3 cycles she had waited here, stationed at the far edge of contested space, and not once had she heard the sound of another life approaching. The platform, once bustling with diplomats and negotiators, was now a skeleton of its former self. Panels flickered with fading lights, and the faint hum of the station's energy systems was the only sound that reminded her she was not floating in emptiness. She settled beside a narrow viewport, the glass cool against her palms. Her species believed waiting alone was sacred, a demonstration of honor, patience, and endurance. It was a ritual passed down for centuries, and failure to wait, to remain steadfast even when forgotten, was seen as weakness. Ixari had been chosen for her strength, for her resolve. And yet, as the cycles passed, the weight of isolation began to press upon her chest. The void was patient, and patience, she realized, could grow heavy. Her eyes traced the distant curve of the planet below. Its surface was scarred by ancient wars, rivers running like veins through cities abandoned long before her arrival. The orbital station hung in silence, and she imagined the thousands who had once crossed its corridors, now gone, leaving nothing but memory and echoes. She focused on the ritual. Every hour she marked, every breath she measured, every stance she held in quiet vigilance was part of the test she had accepted. She could not falter, could not turn away, could not give in to longing or despair. Time passed differently here. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into cycles, until memory itself began to blur. The silence was complete, broken only by the station's occasional mechanical groans. And yet there was a rhythm to it, a pattern that Ixari had grown to recognize. She could hear the faint pulse of the energy cores, the slow rotation of the station through space, even the distant whisper of cosmic winds brushing past the hull. In that rhythm, she found a strange companionship. It was not warmth or conversation. It was presence. On the 4th cycle, something shifted. She felt it first as a vibration through the floor, subtle, almost imperceptible. At first, she thought it was the station itself, settling in the cold vacuum of space. But the vibration persisted, soft, measured, deliberate. She rose slowly, instincts sharpening as the hairs on her neck bristled. There was movement outside the docking bay, a faint shimmer of light against the empty corridor. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from curiosity. A ship was approaching, small, unremarkable by design, but unmistakably piloted. It moved with purpose, its hull glinting under the distant starlight. She had expected no one, yet here it came, silent and deliberate. The docking clamps engaged with a soft hiss, and the bay door slid open. She remained where she was, watching, waiting. The hatch opened, and a figure emerged. He was human, tall, with broad shoulders and a measured stride. His uniform was simple, unadorned, marked only by the insignia of a fleet she did not recognize. His face was calm, eyes steady, and he carried nothing but a small pack slung across his back. He did not speak, did not announce himself, did not bow or signal. He simply walked toward her and sat down beside her on the platform. Ixari's instincts tensed. This was not part of the ritual. Visitors were forbidden. Unexpected contact was dangerous. And yet the human said nothing. He did not reach for her hand, did not speak, did not intrude on her vigil. He simply sat, facing the stars, his presence a quiet statement that needed no words. She studied him. His silence was not the silence of fear or hesitation. It was deliberate. He understood, somehow, that she was waiting. He did not seek to change her, to disturb her, to make her feel less alone. He only joined her. Hours passed, like this. Ixari's initial tension softened into cautious awareness. The human never moved unnecessarily, never spoke, never touched. Yet his presence was a statement, a challenge even, to to the solitude she had carried for so long. She found herself talking quietly, first in whispers, then in structured phrases of her own language. She spoke of the cycles, the station, the ritual, the endless night of space. The human did not respond with words. He simply listened, nodding once or twice, or tilting his head to acknowledge understanding. It was an unspoken communication, a bridge between species. She realized, slowly, that the ritual did not demand solitude. It demanded attention, endurance, and respect for the weight of waiting. And this human, by simply being there, by simply enduring alongside her without interference, was honoring that weight in a way no one else had. The next cycle brought a test. A distant patrol ship passed near the station's orbit, scanning for signs of life. Ixari felt the tension in the hull, the hum of energy readings spiking briefly. She expected the human to reach for a weapon, to activate defenses, to speak commands she could not understand, but he did nothing of the sort. He merely stood, placing himself in line with her observation post, his eyes following the distant patrol with quiet calculation. It was not fear, she realized. It was readiness. Humans, she had learned, did not always respond with immediate action. They observed. They waited. They measured. And sometimes, that waiting was more powerful than any weapon. Days merged into cycles. She began to anticipate the human's presence, the silent reassurance of someone who understood without explanation. She noticed small details, the way he adjusted his stance when the station shifted, the precise timing of his steps across the platform, the way he watched the stars and seemed to calculate distance and movement with effortless skill. He was not extraordinary in appearance, but in his constancy, in his attention, he was remarkable. Ixari's own vigilance deepened. She moved with more precision, noted anomalies with greater clarity, and measured every fluctuation in the station's systems. The human silent companionship had become a mirror, reflecting her own strengths back to her in ways she had never imagined. She was no longer merely enduring. She was sharpening, preparing, honing herself as she had never done before. By the fifth cycle, the human had become part of the ritual itself. The station's emptiness, once a source of anxiety, became a canvas on which their silent companionship was painted. They shared no words, no gestures beyond presence, yet the connection was profound. Ixari understood, in a way her people might not, that strength could be found in shared silence, that honor could be upheld without solitude, that patience could be measured not in isolation, but in constancy alongside another. And so she waited, day after day, cycle after cycle, her gaze fixed on the stars, her body aligned with the rhythms of the station, her mind aware of the quiet human presence beside her. She did not speak often, yet when she did, it was a tribute, a recognition, a statement of respect for the being who had joined her without a word. At night, when the distant planets cast soft glows across the platform, she would glance at him, and he would meet her gaze briefly, not with curiosity, not with intrusion, but with acknowledgement. That small act, repeated endlessly, became the heartbeat of her vigil. For the first time since her arrival, the void no longer felt oppressive. It was not empty. It was not silent. It was alive with the weight of patience and the quiet power of endurance shared. She realized that waiting alone had been her trial, but standing together, without a word, was the lesson the universe had been offering all along. Days blurred together, yet the station remained as alive as it had ever been, not with machinery alone, but with the silent presence of two beings who had learned to coexist in the quiet. Ixari no longer counted cycles in the same way. She measured them in small shifts, subtle changes in the station and in the human beside her. His name, she learned from the logbooks he carried occasionally, was Commander Hale, though he never corrected her pronunciation. He had no need for ceremony, no need to claim the space as his own. He simply existed alongside her, patient, unyielding, steady. Iksari began to notice the details of his routine. He would rise before the station's energy cores hummed their faint morning tune, moving with careful precision, checking minor controls, balancing the power flows she had once taken for granted. She realized he was not idle. His silence was a choice, not a lack of purpose. He observed the patrol routes of distant ships, noted the subtle fluctuations in orbital paths, and adjusted the station's sensors with small, deliberate tweaks. It was a methodical patience that mirrored her own, yet carried a human determination she could not name. She tried to speak to him more often, even if he never answered. Her words were soft, almost a whisper, describing the emptiness of the station, the pattern of lights along the hull, the distant curve of the planet below. She asked questions, though she knew no answers would come, and sometimes she imagined his eyes following her gestures, noting her expressions, learning the rhythm of her vigil. It was strange, she admitted to herself, to feel companionship without conversation. Yet it was no less real for the lack of speech. On the 10th cycle, the first test arrived. A patrol from a neighboring system passed near the station's orbit, scanning for any signs of habitation. Iksari felt the tension immediately. Her people had trained her for such encounters, and yet her training assumed solitude, assumed she would face challenges alone. Hale did not move at first, simply standing behind her as she consulted the station's sensors. His presence was quiet, a shadow beside her, yet somehow it strengthened her. She realized she was not afraid. She was prepared, not for battle, but for observation, for endurance, for the challenge to her vigilance. The patrol passed without incident, but the echo of their sensors and the distant hum of their engines left a residue of tension in the station's air. Iksari felt her heartbeat accelerate, yet Hale's calm stance reminded her that patience, too, could be a shield. The realization sank in slowly. Humanity, she understood now, had a strength that was not always loud or obvious. It was measured, quiet, and unwavering. In the following cycles, she began to notice other subtleties. Hale studied the station's environment, predicting micro-fluctuations in the orbit, anticipating sensor failures before they occurred. He did not announce his calculations, did not brag or instruct, but simply adjusted controls and systems with quiet confidence. Iksari watched, learning without words, and slowly she began to integrate his techniques into her own routines. Together, without speaking, they became more than two individuals. They became a system, a unit, attuned to the station and to the rhythm of space itself. One evening, the station's lights flickered in a brief electrical storm, and a warning signal flashed. Iksari moved quickly, running diagnostics and checking the energy cores. Hale followed, silent but present, his hands steady as he assisted her without interrupting. The storm passed as quickly as it came, leaving no damage, but the exercise revealed something she had not anticipated. She trusted him. She trusted his judgment, his patience, his presence, more than she had trusted any of her own people in past cycles. The realization was uncomfortable, yet undeniable. As the cycles continued, small events tested their bond. Communications from distant fleets occasionally pinged the station, requesting updates or scans. Iksari maintained the pretense of routine, answering only when necessary, her tone formal and precise. Hale did not intervene, but she could see him monitoring each message with careful calculation. He never interfered unnecessarily, never sought recognition. Yet when a message carried subtle threats, when other fleets implied that the station was abandoned and vulnerable, his presence beside her was enough to steady her. Iksari began to feel something that she had never encountered during her training. Respect not born of fear, but of consistency. She had learned that her people valued endurance, that patience was strength, but this was different. Hale's patience was active, deliberate, a choice made each moment. It required neither ritual nor ceremony. It required only presence and attention. And in that choice he had proven more steadfast than any envoy, more honorable than any diplomat who had passed through the station before. Rumors began to reach her from distant communications. Other species whispered of the human who had arrived without warning and joined a solitary Ixari. Some mocked him for wasting time at a forgotten post. Others speculated on his motives. Ixari did not respond, but she observed him closely. He never acknowledged the whispers, never raised his voice, never reacted. He continued the vigil, day after day, cycle after cycle, as if nothing else mattered but the station, the stars, and the quiet rhythm of their shared endurance. The relationship, if it could be called that, deepened in subtle ways. Ixari began to anticipate Hale's movements, noting the way he adjusted the pack on his back, the way he checked minor systems in precise order, the way he shifted his stance when observing distant patrols. She found herself aligning her own actions with his, creating an unspoken choreography that strengthened their efficiency and understanding. In the silent cooperation, she recognized a form of communication that required no language, no gestures, no ceremony, only observation, patience. Then came the first direct challenge. A small fleet from a nearby system entered the station's sector, declaring the orbital platform abandoned and issuing demands for surrender. Ixari felt a surge of tension. Her instincts called for immediate defensive action. Hale, as always, did not speak, did not act rashly. He merely moved to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the approaching fleet, his body steady and his presence an unspoken statement of readiness.
Ixari realized, with a mixture of awe and apprehension, that the human was not merely standing with her. He was asserting a principle.
By remaining silent and unwavering, he claimed the station in a way that was subtle yet absolute. The fleet's sensors would detect activity, but not aggression. Any rash action would risk escalation, yet mere presence communicated intent without confrontation. Ixari understood now what she had been missing. Patience, endurance, and silent resolve could be as powerful as any weapon or negotiation. The fleet eventually retreated without incident, sensing no immediate threat, but noting the station's unexpected occupancy. Ixari felt her pulse slow, her breathing steady, and she looked at Hale. He did not celebrate, did not comment, did not react in any way that required her interpretation. Yet she felt the weight of victory, quiet and complete, and she knew it was the result not of her alone, but of their shared endurance. As the cycles continued, she began to sense a subtle change within herself. The solitude that had once defined her vigil was no longer a burden. She no longer measured her strength by the absence of others, but by her ability to maintain focus, precision, and attention alongside another being. The human had transformed her understanding of endurance. It was no longer about surviving alone. It was about sustaining purpose, attention, and integrity in the presence of another who shared the weight without interference. She began to speak more openly, describing the station's anomalies, the distant planet's slow rotations, the faint signals of cosmic activity that no one else would notice. Hale listened without interruption, his silence an affirmation rather than a dismissal. She found herself learning from him as much as he seemed to learn from her. Together, they became attuned to the rhythms of the station, the subtleties of orbital movement, and the infinite patterns of the stars. Ixari understood, finally, that the vigil was no longer hers alone. Hale had not joined her to share solitude, but to enhance it, to make endurance more profound, more complete, and more meaningful. In the absence of words, in the absence of ceremony, he had become her companion, her equal, and her mirror. The station was no longer a test of patience, but a canvas on which their silent cooperation painted a new kind of strength, one that was uniquely human, profoundly steady, and impossibly rare. And as another cycle began, with the distant sun casting faint light across the platform, and the hum of the station's systems marking time, Ixari realized something extraordinary. Not in the sense she had been trained to endure, but in a deeper, richer way that required observation, respect, and shared presence. The human beside her had not spoken, had not acted without reason, had not interfered unnecessarily, and yet in every quiet moment, he had proven himself more steadfast, more honorable, and more remarkable than any companion she could have imagined. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport, but this time they felt different. They felt like witnesses to something larger than herself, larger than the ritual, larger than the station. They felt like witnesses to the quiet heroism of a human who had joined her without a word, and in doing so, had changed everything. The weeks that followed brought new challenges. Ixari had grown accustomed to the silent presence of Commander Hale. Yet the universe did not pause for anyone's comfort. Sensors picked up irregular traffic near the outer rim, small craft that moved unpredictably, slipping past patrols and scanning systems for weak points. Ixari's instinct was to report, to react, to prepare for confrontation. Hale, as always, was calm. He moved beside her, silent but alert, and she realized that his patience was a tool as powerful as any weapon. It began with subtle anomalies in the station's energy readings, a minor fluctuation, nothing critical, yet enough to draw Ixari's attention. She moved through the corridors, adjusting panels, checking conduits, tracing lines of data to their sources. Hale followed closely, his presence quiet but deliberate, his eyes catching things she would have missed if she were alone. He adjusted systems with precise efficiency, hands moving over controls in ways that made her admire his skill even more. By the second day, the anomalies had grown. Sensor arrays reported faint signals, almost imperceptible, that seemed to pass through the station as though it were transparent. Ixari knew the patterns of energy flux across the platform, yet these readings were different. They were deliberate, intelligent. Someone, or something, was observing the station. "Do you see this?" she asked, finally breaking the silence. Hale looked at the readouts, then at the station's viewport. He did not answer, but he moved to stand beside her, eyes fixed on the distant void, scanning the dark. His presence was a reassurance, a reminder that she was not alone. The signals continued, growing more frequent. A small ship, barely detectable, appeared near the edge of the station's orbit. Its design was unfamiliar, angular and black, designed to blend with the void. It moved without communication, sensors off, engines quiet. Ixari's training demanded alertness, readiness to strike, but she hesitated. Hale did not reach for weapons. He merely observed, his posture steady, unhurried, as though he already understood what she had yet to realize. The ship remained outside the docking bay, silent, scanning, probing. Ixari could feel her pulse quicken, yet the familiar calm of Hale beside her kept her from panic. He made no suggestions, offered no orders. He simply existed, a steady presence, a mirror of her own focus. Together they watched, measured, calculated. The unknown vessel tested their resolve, but in the quiet, they found strength. Hours passed. The alien ship began subtle maneuvers, attempting to align sensors with the station's blind spots. Ixari adjusted her readings, Hale followed suit, and they moved in an unspoken rhythm. No words were exchanged, but coordination grew. Every action she took was mirrored by his awareness, every calculation adjusted by his presence. She realized that he did not need instructions, that he was attuned to the station and to her in ways that surpassed normal cooperation. By the third cycle, the unknown ship made a more aggressive move, moving closer, attempting to dock without permission. Ixari's instincts screamed at her to react, yet she hesitated. Hale's hand rested lightly on the control panel, adjusting communication systems subtly, preparing contingencies she could not yet understand. She felt a surge of admiration and unease. Here was a human, quiet, deliberate, prepared for confrontation without declaring it. He was a force of calm she had never known. The alien vessel attempted a direct approach, but as it drew nearer, the sensors revealed a flaw in its design, something that could be exploited. Hale leaned slightly toward her, pointing without speaking, and she understood immediately. He had shown her the path, without commanding, without pressure, allowing her to act with precision. Ixari activated the station's defensive systems, creating an invisible barrier that forced the ship to retreat. The alien craft disappeared into the void, leaving only faint traces of energy behind. Ixari exhaled, tension leaving her body slowly. She looked at Hale, expecting some expression of satisfaction or triumph. There was none. He remained calm, silent, as if the event had been routine. Yet in his silence, she understood the depth of his confidence, the strength of his restraint, and the wisdom of his patience. In the cycles that followed, the station experienced further anomalies, small sensor distortions, minor power fluctuations, and the occasional detection of distant ships moving near patrol routes. Each time, Ixari reacted with growing confidence, her training now enhanced by the constant presence of Hale. Together they created patterns of observation, anticipation, and subtle defense that kept the station secure without confrontation. She began to recognize the depth of human endurance, where her people measured strength in ritual, in ceremony, in trials endured alone. Hale demonstrated that strength could be measured in attention, in silent support, in the willingness to stand steadfast without recognition. He never interfered unnecessarily, yet his presence amplified her abilities, transformed her vigilance, and redefined what it meant to endure. One day, a message arrived from a distant fleet. It was formal, precise, and carried the weight of authority. The fleet warned that the station was in a contested area and demanded compliance with regional regulations. Ixari prepared to respond, her mind racing through protocols and formalities. Hale did not speak, but he moved beside her, standing as a steadying presence. She realized that his role was not to act for her, but to support her in her own decision-making, reinforcing her confidence and judgment. Her response was calm, measured, precise. She communicated the station's status, detailed its operational integrity, and subtly implied that any interference would be noted. She observed the reactions of the distant fleet's communications, noting hesitation, recognition of unexpected competence, and the subtle acknowledgement that the station was not abandoned. All of this occurred without Hale speaking a word. His mere presence had empowered her to act decisively, with authority, and without fear. The following cycles tested them further. A series of small attacks, minor intrusions, and surveillance attempts were detected. Each time, Ixari moved with growing skill, anticipating threats, adjusting systems, and coordinating subtly with Hale. He mirrored her movements, predicted her actions, and strengthened her own abilities without ever taking command. It was a partnership built on observation, trust, and shared endurance. During one extended cycle, a particularly aggressive ship approached, intent on scanning the station's data cores. Ixari prepared to intercept, yet she noticed a flaw in their formation. She signaled subtly, and Hale mirrored her adjustments. Together they manipulated the station's systems, creating false readings and redirecting the ship's sensors. The intruder finally retreated, unable to discern the station's true capabilities. Ixari felt a sense of triumph, tempered by a deep respect for Hale's role. He had not acted for her, had not interfered with her decisions, yet his presence had ensured success. She began to understand a profound truth. Human strength was not always visible, not always aggressive, not always commanding. Sometimes it was quiet, deliberate, and patient, enhancing the abilities of those around them without recognition or demand. As another cycle began, Ixari walked along the platform, observing the stars, the distant planets, and the silent expanse of space. Hale followed, as always, beside her. She realized that the station was no longer a test of endurance alone. It had become a testament to collaboration, to the power of shared vigilance, and to the quiet heroism of a being who had joined her without a word. She spoke softly, describing the patterns she observed, noting the subtle shifts in energy readings and orbital alignments. Hale listened, his gaze fixed on the void, his body relaxed but alert. There was no interruption, no commentary, only presence. She began to anticipate his movements, his subtle adjustments, and in doing so, she discovered a deeper harmony. Together, They moved as one within the station, a silent partnership that amplified her skills and redefined her understanding of endurance. The universe continued its slow, indifferent rotation, but within the station, a new order had emerged. Ixari was no longer alone, and the solitude she had once valued was transformed into something richer, more profound. She had learned that waiting alone was not the ultimate measure of strength. Strength could be amplified through partnership, patience could be enhanced through observation, and endurance could become extraordinary when shared with someone who understood its weight without question. Hale remained beside her, silent, patient, and unwavering. Ixari recognized that the human had not come to change her, to guide her, or to claim the station. He had come to join her in the vigil, to stand beside her in silence, and to demonstrate that the quiet strength of humanity could match the challenges of the universe itself. And as she watched the distant stars, feeling the station hum beneath her feet and the steady presence of Hale beside her, she understood the truth that had eluded her for so long. Sometimes, the greatest endurance was not endured alone, but shared in silence with someone who would not speak, yet who would never leave.